So recently, the good people at 7Artisans reached out to me and asked if I wanted to check out their newly released 85mm 1.8 lens for the Z mount, which is something I was actually really interested in checking out because my 85mm 1.8 Nikon lens for my Z mount cameras is actually one of my favorite lenses that I use for portraits and street photography and even a little bit of action here and there. So I was really interested to see how this third-party lens could stack up to the Nikon lens that I've been using for quite a while now. So now just a little bit of housekeeping I need to say at the start here. I am in no way being paid for this review, and I am completely free to mention anything I think about this lens, and no one is checking this at all or anything like that. I'm just free to do whatever I want. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. So first off, let's just talk about the build of the lens. Now, this is the lens that I got sent to me. This is 7Artisans, and it comes in this nice little box. We'll just, a little bit of foam at the front, and it came with an instruction manual and a bunch of different other things, but I'm not going to go into that. But basically, we have this cool little box, and this is the lens. Straight off, it does have a bit of weight to it. It's a nicely weighted lens. It doesn't feel cheap in any way in my hand. The metal, I think it's metal, I'm pretty sure it's metal. Metal feels quite solid and nice, and it just feels like a decently well-made lens. On the lens, you'll find a few different things that are actually different than my 85mm 1.8 Nikon lens. Of course, it has the focus ring, which all lenses have. But on this one, the aperture ring is actually dedicated on the lens here. I'll get into my thoughts about this later, but in general, it's the aperture is here. There's also an automatic focus, manual focus button here, and I think this is a programmable button as well, which I never use these things on my lenses if you've ever seen my reviews in the past. But a couple of options for when you're using the lens. I have my Nikon 85mm 1.8 lens right here, so you can see, I'll just take off the hood here and turn it around. On the Nikon, the hood's a little bit different design, it's a little bit larger, so it makes the lens itself look a little bit larger, but if I was to take the hood off, take both hoods off, in general, they're about the same size. And also, when you're holding it in your hand, I can't really tell a difference in weight. The 7Artisan lens and the Nikon lens in general seem to be about the same size and same weight as well. So that's kind of an interesting thing. You're not getting like a extremely light lens that feels super cheap, and it's not like an overly designed, overly done lens that is extra heavy and adds a lot of burden to your camera. So that's a good thing to know. Now, one really big selling point for this lens coming from a third-party maker would be that this is actually designed to work with the internal eye autofocus or face detection in the Nikon Z cameras that I use every day for work, and I was really interested to see how that would actually work as well or better or just well enough when compared to the 85mm that I have from Nikon. So that's a really cool feature at this price point. If it works well, it could be kind of like an interesting aspect of this lens for people just starting out. So yeah, I checked that out in my shooting. We'll jump that in a second. And just looking at the website, just one other thing, this lens apparently has, let me see, 7 groups and 10 elements of its optical design, which help with ghosting and glare. I didn't notice any ghosting or glare in the images that I took, so I guess it works. It also comes with a little port here for a USB-C, so I'm assuming that this can be updated somehow through firmware updates and stuff like that in the future, so maybe to speed up the autofocus or allow for other features that are not available in this lens yet. I've actually never used a lens that actually has a USB-C port to it and that can be updated itself, which is kind of interesting. It'd be interesting to see how this lens develops over the next half year to a year with any kind of firmware updates that come along. If it makes it, like I said, better at autofocusing, faster, or some other option that we don't have available yet that we can just plug a cable into and hook it up to a computer, and we now have an even better lens than we bought. So that's cool. I like how companies are doing firmware updates consistently, like Nikon does a lot. You get more value out of your equipment that you buy these days instead of just buying one and if there's a small change then you have to buy another in the future. So that's a cool little addition. It'd be interesting to see how it pans out over the next year or so. Now, so how did this lens actually stack up when I went out shooting? So I met a model that I've actually used in the past in Tokyo, and we went out for a short little hour and a half photo shoot with this lens. It was raining, it was kind of an overcast day, but still we had lots of fun. And all in all, being a Nikon shooter for the last 25 years or so, starting with the D70, I never really buy third-party lenses just because of various personal reasons and I've just never really gone out and bought them. So I've always had a bit of a bit of a negative view about third-party lenses, a bit of a Nikon snob, you could say, I don't know, but going into this, I wasn't really high on my expectations of the image quality and the availability of the autofocus for face detection and that. I kind of was expecting it to not be that great. But saying that, this lens actually performed really, really well. And all in all, I had zero problems with it. The autofocus, eye detection, face detection, it worked great. We never had any kind of focus issues, like the camera was never searching for the eye focus or anything like that. The type of portraits we were shooting, the auto eye focus was fast. The focus in general on the lens was quick enough that I could pop onto my model's face whenever I needed to, and it just focused really quickly. So this is great. It worked well, and I never had any issues with it. And getting a little nitty gritty with the images and that, when I was shooting, just looking on the back of the camera, I was kind of just like, I was in that negative mindset, like, okay, this lens can't be that good. So I was looking for problems, and looking at the back of the camera, it kind of looked like the images were a little bit over sharp, a little bit more kind of mechanical than I like. I find the Nikon 85mm 1.8 very nice and natural and smooth in its representation of a person's face. And so I was kind of worried, like, maybe this is a little bit overly sharp for my taste. But when I got onto the computer and looked at the raw images and started editing, really, it looks quite nice. I really didn't have any super negative, like, oh man, this is terrible moments when I was looking at the images. They all just looked great. It helps to have a good looking person in front of your camera. Yeah, I can't really say anything negative about the sharpness or about the details in my model's face. The naturalness of the representation of the image was all great. I also found the bokeh to be nice. It's a 1.8 lens, so obviously I'm going to shoot at 1.8. That's just how I like to shoot. We're in a busy area, so I like to really isolate the model with an open aperture. It's not the 85mm 1.2 or 1.4 lens that's amazing. It's a little bit obviously cheaper, smaller. But really, in the end, the bokeh looked fine. The background's nice and smooth. The drop off from her face looked great, and I had really, really no issues with the overall image quality of the images that we got. Now, at one point, I actually shot some images with my 85mm Nikon lens as well, just to give a comparison. And honestly, when I was looking at these images on my computer, I really had to check the metadata to see which image was shot with which lens. So, like, just looking at it, I really couldn't tell which image I shot with the 7Artisan and which image I shot with the Nikon. Now, I'm, putting these up here now. Is it A or B? Which one do you think it is? And actually, right now, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to leave this up here, and you can tell me down in the comments which one you think, and we'll see that, can people actually tell the difference between these two lenses when you're looking at this kind of picture that are very, very similar. I know I had a really hard time looking at my computer and trying to figure out which one it was while I was editing the images. So people will have their opinions, and they'll find little things in the images that are probably a little bit different. But honestly, in the end, they're quite similar. Very, very similar, actually. Now, one thing that I did mention at the beginning of the video was this aperture ring. And I'm not a big fan of aperture rings being on the lens. I like to control everything from the camera. I'm just much more used to that. The lenses I use up until now really don't have these on there. So it's a bit of a learning curve if you're just jumping onto these kind of lenses with the aperture ring on it. This is not a clicking aperture ring. It's just a smooth transition. So I personally, if I'm going to have it on here, I'd prefer it to click, so I know it's changing. When you're changing the aperture, you can look at the camera settings. You might be looking through your EVF and you can see it change. So that's not the end of the world, but I would prefer it to be a clicking one. And honestly, I did notice this moving a little bit as we're moving around and stuff like that. Like I've said with every lens I've tried with these kind of things, they do move when you don't want them to. They will change. So I find when I'm shooting and the aperture is changing on the camera, I don't really change apertures by accident, but whenever it's on the lens, it changes quite often by accident. So you really have to be aware of where your aperture is at all times. Check your settings while you're shooting with these kind of lenses. Also, this lens is only able to change the aperture, it seems, with the aperture ring. When I attach it to my camera, it actually disables being able to change the aperture on the camera. That's an option that you just don't have with these lenses. I know the more expensive Nikon lenses that have the programmable ring on the lens, you can actually disable that, and you can just change the aperture on your camera, which I'm more used to. So that's just a nitpicky thing. You'll get used to it eventually. But yeah, I found it did change every once in a while, and you can't change the aperture through your camera. And just for your reference, I did shoot a series of images at different apertures. So I'll just put these up on the screen right now, and you can see how the images change and the sharpness and everything changes as you go through these different apertures. So I'll just put that up there now for your reference. Some people prefer to shoot a lot more step down than I do, and here are those images. Now, another thing I've been doing a lot more these days in both my professional and personal work is shooting video. So I also use this lens to shoot a whole bunch of video while we are out shooting. And again, I think it looks pretty good. Comparing it to the 85mm lens I have from Nikon, it looks about the same. The bokeh again is quite nice. The autofocus was able to keep up with my model for all the different things we were doing. I even got her to walk with me using my gimbal. I had her walk towards me. We sped things up, standing still and all that kind of stuff, moving the camera around. And all in all, we didn't lose focus at all, I don't think. And everything worked out great with the video as well. Some people out there are probably much more keen-eyed when it comes to this video, stuff like that. So if you do notice anything or have any concerns about the video you see, it was all shot on the Nikon ZF, so it's not the most, cinematic camera in the world. But, all in all, I enjoyed using it. As it's the same size and weight as my 85mm from Nikon, it's very easy to set up on my gimbal and use very quickly. So yeah, I had no problem with the video, and I think it turned out quite nice. So in the end, would I recommend this lens for anybody looking for an 85mm 1.8 lens for portraiture, street photography, or anything like that? And I would say, sure, yeah, if you're just starting out, the price point is quite low compared to the Nikon lens. Seems to be very good quality. The images come out quite similar to my Nikon lens, which is, as a Nikon shooter, a bit of a heartbreak. But having good quality third-party lenses on the market, it's great for everybody. It adds more competition. It gets Nikon and these other makers off their butt and trying to produce even better lenses and add extra features that their lenses don't have yet. So, having these kind of third-party lenses come out is great for everybody. And if you're just starting out, I think it'd be a good option to look at for if you're into portraiture and that. One thing that I should mention that I personally think is kind of an issue when buying these kind of third-party lenses is when you buy things like from, say, Nikon or Sony or Canon, in major cities in almost every country in the world, you'll have a service center. So there's a service center in Shinjuku, I think there's one in Osaka, and other areas around Japan that I can just go in with my lens if there's an issue, give it to them, they'll fix it, obviously I pay for it, and then they'll give it back to me. With these kind of smaller company third-party lenses, once you get the lens, it can be a little bit difficult to now send it back to the companies overseas or send it off somewhere through the mail and wait for it to get fixed and sent back to you. Personally, I'm a little bit hesitant to send my lenses in the mail and things like that to get fixed, because you never know what's going to get banged around and thrown around and stuff like that. Yes, it is cheaper. Image quality seems on par with Nikon. I don't know. I'm sure there's somebody out there who can nitpick things and give a nice big comment in my YouTube, as you guys always love to do. Say for people who are starting out, you've already spent $3,000 on a camera and you can't quite afford another full $1,000 for a lens. It's a great option. Check it out. I always say rent first if you can, or borrow from somebody, but this is a really good option for people who are looking for a good portrait lens. Seems high quality build and good image quality, and I don't think you can really go wrong with it. But if something does happen and you need it fixed, be aware that it might not be the quickest and easiest thing to do compared to other major brand lenses like Nikon and Canon and Sony, where you can just go into the shop and get it fixed. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope this is good. Good job, 7Artisans. Thank you for reaching out and allowing me to use this lens. And yeah, if you guys have any questions or comments, as you always seem to do, which is great, hit me up down below, and we'll talk to you soon.